Good afternoon. Welcome to the June 28th session of the Historic Preservation Commission. Our chair, Ruben Amirian, is absent today, so we're going to have the commissioners vote on a chair pro tem for the day.
I would like to nominate Raj Mardian for the job.
Okay.
A second.
Thank you.
By acclamation.
For having faith in me.
Chair Mardian, chair pro tem.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission, Monday, June 28, 2010, and it's about 2:05. Roll call, please. Here.
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 That first one was for Mike. So.
I thought
Morgan.
Okay.
Mike Morgan.
Report regarding posting of the agenda. The agenda for this meeting was posted on or before Tuesday, June 22nd, 2010, on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Next item is approval of minutes of the 26th, 2010, April 26, 2010. Any corrections or?
I don't have any.
I nominate approval. Of the
I second.
The minutes of the April 26th has been approved.
Now, you'll notice we changed the format of the minutes to be in line with the other city boards and commissions. So those are called action minutes, so it's pretty streamlined. What that does mean is that since we're not going to have a report kind of in writing of what happened, we're relying on the video archive for everything. So as commissioners and when we have people at the podium, we just have to make sure that everyone's got their microphones on and that everything's being recorded. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oral communication. You have it? Okay. Well,
Yes.
Yes.
yes. We'll move on to item 4, oral communication. Discussion is limited to items not a part of this agenda. Each speaker is limited to 5 minutes. The commission may question the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. I don't see any cards at this time. Is there anybody in the public who would like to speak?
No?
I see none. The oral communication period is closed. Mr. J, number 5 usually goes down at the bottom. Is that a new format?
We had a request at the last meeting to move that up, which is in keeping with the council, the format for their meetings.
Okay.
So if you have any comments, this is the time. So.
Any of my colleagues have any comments this time?
Not.
No.
No? None? One comment, Mr. J. I know we discussed in the past that any items that we want to be discussing on the dais here, we have to discuss it as a commission first. Is
Yes.
that okay?
Yeah, we have a list of some of the topics that have been brought up by Commissioner Vidor. We have I think 1 or 2 from you, Commissioner Mardian. We wanted to bring that when we have a full house to really have the discussion. So as of now, the July meeting looks like everyone's in town. So.
Well, that's good to know. Thank you. I'm going to move the agenda around a little bit before we get to the old business, since there's a member of Alex Theater here. Is that fine with my colleagues?
Yes, absolutely.
Can we go to item 8A, Alex Theater?
Okay, I have a brief presentation to show you about this project. This is a painting project at the main facade of the original theater building, where you actually enter into the lobby and then into the theater auditorium. And this is kind of following up on work that was done in the early 90s that was part of that campaign of restoration. What's happened, and you'll see in the photos, is that a lot of the work that was done then has just really gotten battered by the sun and rain and really needs to be worked on. You all received a copy of a report from Tatiana Thompson. This is the kind of thing, it's kind of a fun aspect of preservation when people actually do this kind of analysis of early paint finishes. And her work was basically trying to identify what are the most correct, historically correct and appropriate colors for retouching and redoing the facade areas that are part of the project scope. This is a project that didn't need to come to the commission for a vote because it meets all standards, preservation standards and secretary standards, but because the Alex is such a high-profile project and we're going to be looking at the forecourt renovations sometime in the future, we just want to keep you guys aware of everything that's happening. So the scope of work is basically this facade from the ground up, the two columns and the facade, the frieze mural, the medallions, the bronze urns at the top, and then this cresting across the top. And the condition, you can see there were some crack repairs made after the last renovation, so we have some kind of just unsightly crack repairs. You can see just the fading and the water washing across the facade has really changed the appearance and took away from what its original appearance was and even its appearance after the last restoration. This column capital has several colors on it. The stenciled kind of painted treatments are fading. So what Tatiana Thompson's work did was she got up on scaffolding. She was up close investigating the entire facade area and saw that these medallions, which are actually cast iron with kind of a bronze colored paint on them, are showing some deterioration, need to be recoated with paint. That's the best way to keep cast iron from rusting. There are cracks in this the mural painting, which is actually on canvas that's applied into onto the facade there. There are cracks, chalking, fading of the entire mural, so that will be touched up. And then this is the proposal for this treatment of these floral, I guess, foliate motifs, whatever it is, running around the main opening. And in the package you received by mail, you got some color samples. So this motif, there's going to be a lot of this kind of brown statuary bronze type finish, interspersed with a kind of a pale gold color on alternating motif elements here. And then the entire facade area is going to be painted in kind of a subtle yellow beige color, which will bring it back closer to the appearance it had after the last restoration and its earlier look. And then portions of the inner vestibule, mainly the areas above the doors and the ticket booths, the old ticket booths along the side walls of the vestibule are going to be part of the scope of work. When you're actually at the site and you look up in here, there's some really nice painted stencil work and mural work. And that's not part of the scope because that's been protected from the elements, so it hasn't faded and still looks good. So they're really just addressing the areas that are of concern.
This project isn't technically part of the forecourt restoration
No,
project,
it's a separate
right?
project.
So this project, timing-wise, is going to come through first before
Yeah, the
that?
proposal is to go to bid in July and to have work begin in August.
Okay, so in other words...
It's not connected. The forecourt
connected.
project is going through a lot of review right now.
But obviously, because it's all one integrated facility, the forecourt project then would, as it develops and coalesces, would take into consideration what's being done here.
Yeah, we just had a meeting with the design team and talked about that,
They're
and that's definitely the
communicating.
plan. Yeah, there's
Okay.
definitely going to be integration. Everyone's familiar. If you have any questions, we have members or people from the Alex and GRA here. If you have other specific questions.
Question on the shells. Are those only occurring on the ticket booth area?
These shells down here?
Right.
Yeah,
Mention
there's...
something in the report.
Yeah, and this is where Jack Alloway may be able to help us. The cresting at the top here is not all in place right now, and I believe that's part of the proposal to bring that back. And then the shells in the ticket booth area are in place, and those will just be repainted. There's Jack Alloway.
Good afternoon, Chairman Marty and members of the Commission. Jack Alloway with the Alex Theater. The cresting at the top was removed about 6 years ago because we were afraid of the danger of it falling off, actually. It was not very good shape up there. We have maintained examples of the pieces hanging over the facade are actually lion's heads. We have one of those, and we have the cresting on the top. And from these, fiberglass molds will be created to recreate the cresting and the lion's heads.
So you're recreating it.
Yeah, we'll put it back exactly the way it was.
Now, since I have you up here, how about the medallion color? Can you talk to the medallion?
That medallion, I believe she wants it show. I don't have that.
She had
Quite get
the
the color.
bronze.
Bronzish, yeah.
Bronzish? Okay.
Yeah.
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 There were two options in the report,
Right.
and Alex has decided to move forward with the statuary bronze option
Bronze,
instead of which has more metallic sheen.
Yeah, that's good.
But it approximates the look of, sometimes metallic sheen can be beautiful if it's like a patina, and sometimes it can look like, glitzy in an inappropriate way. So,
Yeah.
is it designed to
It will be
create a
designed to as
patina?
closely
Okay.
look at that patina as they can.
All right.
So overall, we're bringing back as much as went to the original scheme of colors, in a sense.
Yeah, the preservationist did a lot of work out there last winter and actually dug down and to find the different layers of color. So we're confident that this is as close to the original as it can be.
Any other question? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I was very impressed with the level of research and attention to detail they did.
Yeah, at first, when I read the report, it was very impressive and very interesting to read, and I didn't realize that, I didn't look at the letterhead, and I thought, God, where did Jay get the time to do all that and climb up on ladders? And I'm like, oh my God.
They gave me a ladder. I didn't know what else to do.
Wow.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Then, anything else on that, Alex? And for the time being, this is it?
No, this is it for now.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Keep you posted.
All right. Okay, let's go back to item 6, old business. A, potential changes to Mills Act program, ongoing consideration and discussion regarding work plans and concurrent Glendale Register application.
And this item is going back to the April hearing. I'm sure you remember we discussed 6 possible changes we could make to the Mills Act program. And those were changes I was recommending. I wasn't actually recommending. I was putting them out there for commission discussion to see if there was a way we could make our program more robust and hold owners more accountable who are in the program to make sure that at least some of the money that they gain through the tax break is actually involved in the ongoing maintenance of the house. So we discussed 6 items. You had some differing levels of interest. So the plan for now is to bring those items back that you were more interested in talking about now and getting some kind of resolution. And then we'll look at the whole package once we're done with the series of discussions and kind of come forward with a final recommendation. And we'll work with the city attorney's office to find out if there are things, that may have impacts on existing contract holders and how we'd work that out. So the 6 items we looked at were the idea of extending the Mills Act to contributors in historic districts, a question that I raised about whether the Glendale Register nomination and the Mills Act application should be processed concurrently or if we should have a waiting period between designation and eligibility for the Mills Act. We talked about 2 somewhat related issues, the work program that we expect people to tell us what they're planning to do in the next 10 years when they file the application, and then also the inspection of properties that are in the Mills Act, which is how the city is going to make sure that people are holding up their end of their contracts. We talked about the idea of previous rehabilitations and whether we should allow Mills Act contracts for recently or significantly rehabilitated properties. And we also talked about a valuation cap in terms of the maximum amount of value that a residential or commercial building could have. The last 2 items, the previous rehabilitation and the valuation cap, the commission basically was not concerned about, didn't think those were issues that we needed to pursue any further at this time at least. So we've kind of taken those off the table for now, unless something changes. The Mills Act for contributors in historic districts, the commission asked us to lower the kind of priority level to keep that in play, but not necessarily make any resolution right now. One thought we have at staff level is because we have the Ross Moyne district with over 500 houses online and a few other potential districts online, sometime in the next 2 years, we may actually have a significant number of properties in the Mills Act program, and it might be more appropriate to start talking about this when we actually kind of see how these districts are working, what the rehabilitation needs are of the properties in those areas, and then see how we would kind of logistically expand the program to include so many more potential applications. Many other cities do that, but those are cities, especially LA and Pasadena, as our neighbors, that have a significant number of properties in their historic districts right now. So today I wanted to kind of bring back 2 of these items and kind of overlap onto a third. And I don't really have a formal presentation for any of these. I just wanted to have the commission kind of discuss this, and maybe we'll come up with some more kind of priority listings and get some direction. The first would be the discussion about the concurrent applications. It would be staff's recommendation that we do have some kind of lag time, and this is really just an effort to make sure that people who are applying for the Glendale Register kind of are acknowledging that they understand what it means to be on the register, they understand the expectations of the city, and that assuming everything goes well in the first 6 months, first year, and that would be an option for the commission to discuss if you want to even consider it, we would see that, they understand what their responsibilities are, and then once they're confident that they're ready to enter into the Mills Act contract, at that point we could start the paperwork for that. In terms of the time frame, I don't know what an appropriate time frame would be. It seems like at least a year probably, so that someone has a good sense of what it means to live in a property that's on the register and has those expectations on it. So I was hoping to, I guess if we break the discussion up, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Mr. J, before you go too far, wouldn't it be wise to have the other full commission review some of these items with us?
It would be, and it's unfortunate that we can't. There's a point where there are certain things that we think are so important that we really want to make sure the commission's here. One of our discussions today is one of those items, but the timing is appropriate to run it at this meeting.
Okay.
If you'd like to do that, of course, it's your
I don't know how does
discretion.
Well, I think it's worth it to have a discussion. We weren't going to actually solidify or codify.
No, I don't picture any voting today. It's just really getting a sense of direction, and then, like I said, we'll compile all of your thoughts on the Mills Act after we're done with the series of talks. So.
Okay. So do you want to start discussing the lag period first?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, any questions?
I have a comment. Yeah, I think 1 year would be a reasonable amount of time to put between the two, because we don't want to make it so long when I think initially the Mills Act was done to also be a little bit of an incentive for homeowners that might not have done this otherwise, yet we want to preserve structures. However, currently, one would already be waiting a year or two for the tax credit to really take place. So if the home or structure was approved in 2009, the owner wouldn't see a credit until 2011 by the time, I think, reassessment's made and by the time it already comes. So you already have probably about a 2-year lag. So adding 1 more year before they could even apply puts you out about 3 years, which to me seems like a good amount of time for someone who, if we're trying to incentivize, you don't want to make that so long that they don't come forward at all. Now, some people, because of the love of historic preservation, will do that anyway, and no matter what the wait would be, it wouldn't have been there, wouldn't have deterred that. But I guess 1 year to me, because of the lag that's already taking place just in the system, seems reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
Commissioner Rideau?
I agree with Commissioner Shire. I probably could go in either direction with it, say concurrent application, as long as they recognize there's going to be a lot of due diligence and it isn't a foregone conclusion that they're going to get the Mills Act. But I like the idea of waiting because it seems like some people are motivated to list their house by the incentive of a tax reduction and maybe haven't taken the time to understand what it entails, and their highest priority may not be rehabilitation, and I hearken back to March when we saw a painful example. I won't mention any names, of a house that, I just got the feeling that the people really didn't have an understanding of what it meant to be the owners of a listed landmark and to respect the character of the house and a historic property. So I think a lag time is a good idea, and I would certainly support a year. That seems very reasonable.
Thank you. I do agree with both commissioners. I think a year is a sufficient time for somebody to make a decision. I think we should pursue the 1 year. And the lag period shows if there is, strong incentive to preserve, not just for the purposes of Mills Act. And we'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
The second part of this that I wanted to bring up today was just the idea of the work plan component of the application. Some cities don't even let an owner become part of the Mills Act unless they need to go through a significant rehabilitation. So in Pasadena, you can't qualify unless you come in and say, I need to put a new roof, I need to do some structural work, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So in those cases, they're coming to the city where they have a work plan in mind. They know what they need to do, and it's kind of all laid out. And then the city can make an assessment whether it qualifies for their program or not. We don't have anything like that. We've basically said we give the Mills Act to owners who are on the Glendale Register, and we do expect that they're going to keep up the house. And in some cases, when owners come to us and they know that they're going to be putting a new roof on sometime in the near future, they need it, and they're just waiting to save up for it or something, they may have that on their application. But we have a lot of people come in where they don't know. They don't know when their stucco is going to need work. They don't know when the roof's going to fail. So it's really hard for them to kind of give us a specific work plan. So one thought I had to kind of level the playing field so that we have, and this is based on some of your comments at the meeting when we talked about this, and then also an idea I had the other day, is to require 3 things from people coming into the program. And it's possible that we could even require this of people going into the Glendale Register, but we don't. That would be anything affecting the register is an ordinance revision. With the Mills Act, we have more flexibility to kind of change policy at the staff level. But we had talked about asking people to provide a termite report, which could be something that they would provide at the time of application for the Mills Act, so that we have a sense of, are there any issues? And if there are, then we can work on a work plan to address that work during the course of the Mills Act contract. We could also ask people to give us proof that their house has been earthquake retrofitted, so that the foundation is bolted or strapped or whatever else is needed. And again, that could be something that's given to us at the time of application. And then the third item, which is I think new to the Commission, is the idea of requiring owners at the time of application and then on an ongoing basis, perhaps every 5 years, to hire a home inspector to kind of come through the house. And this would be the kind of inspection people, new buyers, are forced to go through, where you have someone come out who's certified by the home inspection certifying agency, whatever that group's called. And, they're up in the attic, they're under the floor, in the basement, they're really looking around, and they're looking at things that even the homeowners themselves aren't necessarily seeing. So there's a good chance that they could start catching leaks that people don't know about, shower pan problems, roof leaks, and basically just look at all of the fixtures and furnaces and everything else to make sure they're in working order, so that we have a good sense that these houses are being maintained. If a report were to come in and say, there's some serious problems, then that's something we would ask the owner to work on within a given time frame as part of their contract. So those are 3 kind of more objective measures I think we can look at, since so many of our properties aren't going to really come in with a work plan that, that is going to be fair with what everyone was. Some people may have a lot of work they know needs to happen. Some people maybe have a house in perfect condition, and who knows when they're going to have those problems. So those are some thoughts about how to deal with the work program and kind of make sure that the houses are being treated more equally than they are now. and I say houses, it's any kind of property qualify for the Mills Act.
Going back to your statement, now, is this any different? In addition to the home inspector, if somebody's buying a house, they're going to do the inspection regardless? This is...
Well, if they're a new buyer and they're coming into the program, theoretically,
that will suffice?
yeah, if it's already listed and it's already in the Mills Act, then we'll just get a copy of their inspection.
Okay.
The idea would be for a long-term owner, and I don't know, if a 3-year basis, a 5-year basis, it's not incredibly expensive to do the inspections. It's a few $100s, so it's not a real burden, but it does give us a record that we could keep in the files for the projects and see if there are significant changes over time, and just kind of help guide people toward repairs that are going to be appropriate and just prolong the life of the building.
Okay. Well, Commission, any thoughts?
About the earthquake retrofitting, is that something that you would think we would mandate or just ask about and have on record whether or not they were earthquake retrofitted?
I would think we'd want to mandate that for us, particularly if someone's getting a Mills Act contract. It seems like one of those basic things that can really protect a building in a way that, a lot of these other things aren't as important as that. And again, anyone buying a house, I think the insurance companies are going to make sure that that's done, so we'll have a record for new buyers. And then for existing buyers, and it could be part of the home inspection. When the home inspector is under the house, they're looking to see if there's any kind of bolting or strapping, so.
Okay. On the idea of the work plan, I like the idea of the homeowner addressing things, even if there's nothing that has to be done. So we get a sense that there's an awareness that they understand what it is that makes their house, that they understand the history and the architecture of their house and what it is they're preserving. Because I think, now, especially in a time when there's the building biographer and, people who are doing historic analysis for a living of houses so people can get them listed, sometimes people are just going through the motions, and I may be too harsh on that evaluation. Certainly that wouldn't apply to anybody I know, but I know that there are people in the business to get this done, and it would be nice to have an owner, turn their eyes critically on the house and, get an understanding that they've looked at the windows, they've looked for leaks, that they recognize the features of the house, and even if their report is check, 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 everything looks in order, let's see what they have to say. So I don't know if that's asking too much, but
And
I'd like
you're
to
thinking
hear
that
from
would
the others.
that would be a work program that they put into when they apply for the Mills Act? It would be on their
Well,
application?
a work program that, you mentioned that people would want to come forward with their game plan for doing restoration work. But if they didn't have any restoration work to do, if they had made a decision that the house was perfect, they wouldn't have to say anything, is what I'm assuming. And what I'm saying is that they would have a template of things to address, and even if there wasn't anything that they had to do, that they would still acknowledge why they don't have to do anything. The windows are wood, they're not leaking, they're in good shape, they're
Okay.
representative of that type of thing.
And that could tie into a home inspection also, where they're
Yes.
looking at those same things
Sure.
and kind of breaking it down by components and systems.
Right, but a home inspection, when you're in due diligence period to buy, doesn't include historic things unless you would focus the inspector on that.
Right. So I think maybe if we had a template that went alongside something like that, and I guess that would mean we would need to have the home inspection come in with the application, and then expect it on an ongoing basis. And then the template could be the homeowner checking off, like you said, if they say there are single pane glass windows that don't meet, aren't as energy compliant as they could be, the homeowner will check it off saying, I intend to keep windows that, keep the appearance of the house. And
Right.
okay.
Well, I think she brings out a good point, Jay. We should be more specific, at least on main items of the home, like roofing, windows, doors, garage doors, that are more apparent. At least they can include that. My question also was, aren't we already doing some of that in the application? The applicant already says, okay, I'm going to do this work and that work. And
Yeah, when
seen
we
it.
have that, we had one applicant come in where their garage had been altered, and the roof had been taken off, and they said, we're going to rebuild the roof based on historic photos by 2013, I can't remember. And so then it becomes our responsibility to track that and make sure they're doing it, but it's written into the contract. So the recorded contract with the county has that information in it. For ongoing maintenance, we're not going to re-record everything, so we're going to just be working with the homeowners because we have the contract in place, and if they're violating the terms of the contract, we can penalize them if we had to. So I think we have enough teeth in the program right now to keep the ongoing work, make that not an issue.
Okay. Commissioner Shire?
Yeah, I like the idea of adding a couple things, the home inspection along with the termite report. I think initially, as well as maybe on an every 5 years, because I know termites alone can eat quite a bit in 5 years. And so I think just the awareness to the city and also to the homeowner of both of those types of reports, I think would be good.
Yeah, I do agree also that we need to have some sort of work plan. The termite report is important, the earthquake retrofit is important, and I think the homeowner inspection is important, in addition to what Commissioner Vidor said also, that we be a little more historically oriented. So, okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then a third point on this, which ties into, I'm not prepared to talk about kind of the city's inspection of the properties at this point, because I want to talk to some more colleagues in other areas to really find out how their inspection programs work and what the problems are. But one thought that I believe Commissioner Shire may have mentioned 2 months ago is the idea that when people apply for the register, we have photo documentation of the properties, but it's basically we're relying on the building biographer's photos or the homeowner's photos, sometimes augmented by staff photos, but we don't have a systematic approach to documenting the existing conditions. So one thing I'd like to recommend is that we add a feature to the Glendale Register nomination package that requires applicants to submit an architecturally delineated site plan of the property, so that we have a dimension site plan, so we know, where the garage is, what the projections of the house are, how the footprint looks, and then we could take that and create a photo key so that we make sure that we have all the photographs documented, so we know when we're looking at a photograph that it's the window on the east facade instead of on the west facade, and then we have really good baseline documentation of the house from the time that we're even looking at the nomination. And then, and this is something we talked about last time and we'll address again in a future meeting, possibly work off of that system to allow people to submit photos on a every 2-year basis or whatever the commission decides to update us with the existing conditions on that period, which would keep staff from having to go out to all of the properties and do that inspection. But that's also a possibility. If people didn't want to do that, or if we thought there were issues, we'd still want to be able to do the field inspections, which are built into the Mills Act. We give ourselves the ability to inspect properties with 24-hour notice as part of the contract. But this would apply to all Glendale Register nominations, regardless of whether they're applying for the Mills Act, regardless of whether we give it to them when they do apply. We'd still have that documentation. So, one thing I should mention about all of this is I've spoken with the city attorney and we don't have any final resolution, but a lot of these ideas I had hoped we could make retroactive to existing Mills Act contracts. Some we may be able to, some we may not be able to. So once we kind of get our kind of wish list of what the commission wants to do, we'll sit down with them and really focus on that and see, if we can bring it back to existing contracts or not. And we could also offer it to owners on a voluntary basis if they wanted to. So.
Question about, I don't know if this is relevant to include in either the nomination package or the Mills Act, but I think if you're nominating your house, obviously it becomes part of the public record, and information about your house and where it's located is readily accessible through public channels, and maybe it is a good opportunity, even though it shouldn't be a criteria for selection or not, to find out from people, to collect data, because we have their attention when they're applying for something. And some of the data that's very interesting, I think, to the community is, are people interested in ever opening up their house or making it available for public tours and things like that? And, I wouldn't want to intimidate or scare anybody who wouldn't be interested in that, but it might be an interesting question to ask.
And the Mills Act contract already has some language for that built into
I
the
didn't know
contract,
that.
but we've never enforced it.
Oh.
But it's something,
it
we
is
could
there.
certainly give,
Great.
the historical societies or the LA Conservancy or anyone a list of properties, and then we could also reach out to property owners to see if they could open it up. I'm not sure that we would want to, even if the language is in there, force people.
No, not
to-
force
yeah.
people, but just some people, I think, maybe don't even realize, if they're just moving in, they may not know that there's a historical society and an active touring program going on in Glendale, so it's also a way for them to get information.
Following up what Svidor said, now you gave us a chart, I don't remember which meeting. The part of the Mills Act was also to have tours. I don't know which city does that. There was something there, home tours,
Yeah, I think.
other Mills Act obligations.
Yeah, there are a few cities that do that. I don't know, like I said, with us, I don't know that they actually force people to do it, or if it's just built into the language. So.
And I'm not suggesting that we should force people to do it or make
No,
it a
we don't.
criteria, but,
No.
to connect up owners of historic properties with the Historical Society and with the, people in the city who are involved in preservation would be a good thing.
Thank you. Any more comments from you?
Well, really, really quick. That brings up a good point. What happens when ownership changes? Is the city notified? If, let's just say there was a Mills Act contract and the previous owner didn't pass on that documentation or don't have the contract anymore. What happens with?
Yeah, because it's recorded with the county during the whole title and escrow period, it would automatically
Okay.
go to the new owner.
Okay.
So, yeah, they would know that it's there.
And they'll have to sign that?
No, the contract, they're bound by the contract. The contract
Okay.
goes with the property, not with the owner. So anyone moving into the house afterwards continues to be bound by it. There are provisions to cancel a contract, but it has to be mutual. The city and the owner have to agree. And then if they violate the contract, there are stiff penalties. So.
Well, hopefully one day we'll become a little bit like LA Online. You can click on the address on their website and you'll show with Mills Act.
Someday.
Someday. But I think...
Sorry, Chairman Marty, in the meantime, it's actually worth noting that I think most of the 3 or 4 registered properties in Glendale that have gone up for sale, they've advertised quite extensively that they're registered properties in the Mills Act program as part of the sales package. So I think they're using that as a
Yeah, I see that
Selling
sign
point.
also.
I've
I see
seen
that.
Mills Act on the actual sign
yeah.
in the front yard, so
Well,
I know what it means now.
I do agree with Commissioner Shire. I think I asked this when I first joined the commission about a site plan, some sort of a documentation on the plan. I think it's an excellent idea. But do we really want to put additional burden on the applicant to hire somebody to draw the site plan? I mean, that's
Well,
something...
that's a question I left open for you to discuss, but I think it is something, and we could shift that to the Mills Act application rather than to the Glendale Register nomination, if you choose.
Okay.
And in that case, then I think we have, grounds to say, you're getting a significant tax break, so we need this.
I think
It
it
would
should
be nice to
attached.
have it for all of the nominations, though. But you're
Yeah.
right, it will be an expense.
It'll be an expense.
There's no fee to nominate a property, so that would kind of become a de facto fee if we did require it. And in a way, we have chosen not to have a fee for registered nominations because we don't want to have the disincentive, so.
Well, this second thing I was thinking, okay, we do the site plan, but then I'm thinking in the past, in our packets, when we get a designation, we do get the assessor's diagram. I don't know if we've been getting it lately or not, but I don't recall. We do get some sort of a diagram that the assessor or somebody
Yeah,
has.
those are, I think we'd probably want to have something that was more usable, especially if we're going to use it as a photo key,
Okay.
so that we could, have it at a scale that we can read and
Well, just
markup.
the reason I'm trying to make it a little more lenient, we don't want to make it more complicated than, the application process becomes complicated. to get people more, to come in and apply for a designation. But I think it's a worthy...
shifting it to the Mills Act may be the way
Okay.
to address
Okay.
that, so.
Okay,
That sounds all right to
Yeah.
me.
that's fine.
Okay.
We'll move on. Okay.
Okay, so of the three things we talked about, it sounds like a 1-year lag between Glendale Register designation and application for the Mills Act, which will turn into about a 3-year time period before they receive the tax benefit. Sounds good to everyone. In terms of the work program, having a home inspection, termite inspection on some kind of regular basis. I'm not sure that we got direction in terms of how much time. Was it 5 years you were thinking?
Termite was 5 years, yes.
And then the home inspection could be done at the same time. And then also the assurance that at the beginning of the period that the house is earthquake retrofitted, and if it isn't, then we build that into the Mills Act contract that within a certain time frame, they'll take care of that. And then we'll also develop some sort of template to go along with the home inspection report so that we can make sure the owners understand how that interfaces with the historic character and the historic materials of the house. And those two documents will then be something that we use when we compare every 5 years to make sure that nothing's changed too significantly. So, and then finally, the idea of requiring a site plan and keyed photo documentation for all Mills Act applicants, but not for Glendale Register applicants. We'll still work on the Glendale Register to have good photo documentation because we need that for any of the applications. But it won't be as costly to the owner, so.
So we're attaching the site plan only with the Mills Act application?
Right.
Okay.
So the Mills Act will now have these reports as well as the photo documentation and the site plan as part of the required. We'll change the application package to make sure that's all clear, so everyone knows what we're looking for.
Okay. That was item A on old business. We'll move on to item 6B, establishment of a minimum age requirement for listing on the Glendale Registry, ongoing consideration and discussion.
Yeah, and this is just following up. Commissioner Mardian had brought up the idea of possibly establishing a minimum age. This is something I'm not sure if you want to vote on today. I was kind of hoping to get this kind of resolved because we don't have an official kind of direction from the commission. So we could either table this until July when we have a full house, or if the commission wants to consider it and vote today, that would be great. This would require an ordinance change. So if it's the commission's desire to establish that, we would then have to go to city council for the ordinance change. What we might want to do is kind of bundle it with any other changes that we wanted to bring in, so it might not happen immediately, but we would definitely know that that was the direction. Staff's recommendation is not to have a age limit. 30 years is basically the most recent amount of time that people expect to have the lag period to assess whether something's significant or not. Some cities do the 30-year rule, and if we were to do something like that, right now that would be anything 1980 and more recent. We never have been getting applications like that, and part of the reason I'm kind of opposed to it on a professional basis is that it just limits the commission. Right now we have a very good ordinance that really allows us to consider the full range of properties that people are interested in the city. And if you saw a property from 1988 that you thought, oh, wait a minute, it's from 1988, we don't really understand this period well enough, we can't put it in context, you still have the privilege of not voting for a property, but you could still consider it. And to me, that's where we still have kind of a check and balance system that's not going to all of a sudden have a slew of, 10-year-old properties coming in for listing.
Well, I do agree with you, Mr. Chair. We should maybe continue to have a full commission, but if my commission colleagues want to discuss it a little bit, we can. The reason I brought this up, because I really felt, we're a historical commission. We need to establish an age limit for the buildings that we designate. And also the word historical means something in the past, and it should be identified as such. And, we need to see the performance of the building. Buildings built in the 80s, I think they're in poor quality, and they show that after 20 years. I'm sorry to say that.
We'll skip the 80s.
But we did get some designation in the 70s. The reason, I just want to see how the public perception on these buildings is, and also how they, the performance of the building. And I do agree with you. There may be some good examples that are within 20 years, and I can name you some, but I'm not going to name it. They may come for that, but we should maybe have an exception or some criteria that, we're not just saying, okay, 30 years, for example, we're discussing the age 30. If somebody comes in with a superb architecture or some craftsmanship, I'm not, going to say no to it. But I think we should have some cloud and exception that says, okay, if, we will review it based on certain research. And that's where I was coming from. Let's also assume if somebody comes in with a wonderful Spanish period home design, and 20 years have gone by, and no significant event have taken place there or any significant person has lived there. Now, are we going to just say, okay, because it's architectural, it's historical, or it's worthy of preservation, or it's worthy of designated as a Glendale registry? Because we do have tremendous amount or vast amount of, for example, Spanish architecture in this town. Same thing with Tudor, same thing with other example. And that's where I was coming from. And I don't want to, create another layer of, process or anything, but we do have an ordinance on the demolition that is 30 years old. And I felt that we may have an age limit to a building. Now, again, we may add an exception to it if, if the commission at the later stage decides, we don't just close it at 30, we can put some sort of a clause.
Well, we'd have to build that in. The federal government has a 50-year rule, which the preservation community nationwide is lobbying against, and everyone thinks that that's going to be withdrawn at some point in the future. The direction is to not have age limits, just in general. But what at the national level, for something to be put on the National Register and it's less than 50 years, you have to make a finding of exceptional significance, and there's another kind of form that you use to kind of prove exceptional significance. And you can see where the problem is, what is exceptional? How do we define it? How do we, objectivize this? And I think that's why, in general, people are moving away from that. I think there's a sense that commissions, you look at properties built in 1928, and sometimes you say, no, that's not really worthy of the register. You could do the same thing with the properties from 1988. But if we did go with 30 years, I think we'd have to build in some sort of exception, like you mentioned, for special significance.
Commissioner Shire, any thoughts?
Yeah, I see where you're coming from, and I think there's two sides to it. Ultimate freedom and flexibility, and what Jay's talking about, we can always not vote and not approve those that are less than 30 years and don't meet the criteria. But ultimate flexibility probably gives us the best of both worlds, knowing that that's a guideline we have, that if it's under 30, it's more restrictive criteria that has to be met as we're discussing it and weighing that, but it's not something set in stone as to a certain number of years before we could even look at those or review those.
Yeah, I feel rather strongly about this one. I really think we shouldn't set any limits, and that's not because I think buildings that are too young or too immature, let's put it that way, shouldn't be considered, but because the historical context of America is so shallow in a way in terms of it being a country and being only like 300 years old, I think the whole concept of what is historical is a little bit compressed. And I think in California, we're the most compressed of all the states in the country. So the dialogue, a public dialogue about what is significant, what's coming into significance, what might someday be significant is an extremely important discussion to have and to keep open. So if somebody, for instance, were to come with a 20-year-old neo-Spanish Revival house, which, would be like, I think that to be able to discuss in a public setting why that would not qualify and what the historic context of something like that versus a pristine 1920 Spanish Revival House is an important discussion to have. And I think when we did the Japanese tea house, I don't think it was yet 30 years old when it was designated.
It's 1974
Or-
house, so it was.
It might have just gone over 30. I don't remember what year that was, but it was in the early 2000s. And, clearly that's an example of a property that's highly significant, very contributing to the well-being of the city, and has, a very profound history. So that was kind of a no-brainer, but I think there will be houses and commercial buildings that'll come before us that will be very gray area. And, we have so many diverse styles that not only are from past years but are popping up all the time. And I'd like to be able to consider them and not just have veto power right away. So I'm a strong vote in favor of keeping it open.
Okay, and then you want to bring this back when we have
The full commission.
commission.
It'll be an
Okay.
interesting discussion.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to new business. Number 7, any new business?
Where are we? Report about the commission's role in design review. Now that we have our historic districts online, we have more coming our way, and we also are doing design review in our Glendale Register properties. We have the full urban design team here today to kind of just walk you through the process. And it's unfortunate we don't have a full house, so you're going to have to share your wisdom with your colleagues when we have these issues. So Alan Loomis.
Legal to do that?
They can watch the TVs.
Yeah, they'll watch it on
One at a
television.
time.
Alan Loomis will start the show.
Yes, this is, as Jay said, it seems apropos to talk to you about the design review process for properties in historic commissions, or historic districts. As the commission is hopefully recalls, you are the design review authority for properties in historic districts, adopted historic districts. This is in addition to your role as the historic review and design review authority for properties that are on the Glendale Register and have official register historic status with the city. There's a slight difference in a way between these different kinds of properties. The historic district property, historic register, Glendale Register properties, not only functioning as a design review authority in some cases, you're also fundamentally reviewing the proposed work on the house for its potential impact on the property's continued listing as a historic property. So you're engaged in a kind of discussion about how is this work appropriate to the historic nature of that property. In the historic districts, it's more fundamentally just design review with an eye towards the historic character of the entire district, more so than the individual house. One of the things that's been very important when the Historic District Ordinance was adopted and drafted, and then as we've talked to property owners and advocates in the historic districts, both the 3 that are adopted today and Ross Moyne and some of the others that are moving forward, is that the design review process would essentially mirror the process that currently happens with the Design Review Board. The main difference being that the Historic Preservation Commission is the design review authority, and you have the Historic District Guidelines as an additional tool that Design Review Board doesn't have. But otherwise, the fees for design review applications are the same in historic districts as they are outside of the districts, and the process of review should be essentially the same. So given that we have Ross Moyne, 500-plus homes on the horizon, as well as the existing districts that we have, and in fact, we're talking with an owner from one of the districts that is working on a proposal that you may actually see this summer. So you have a first opportunity to function as the design review authority for house in one of the historic districts. It seemed appropriate to talk to you about how we manage design review at the Design Review Board and how we think that will apply and carry over to the Historic Preservation Commission. So we've asked Stephanie Reich, who's our senior urban designer, to join us. Many of you know Stephanie. If you've ever watched Design Review Board, she manages our Design Review Board and has developed the process for how Design Review Board engages in a discussion and analyzes design. And so we've asked her to join us today and kind of talk to you about how Design Review Board functions in terms of their analysis, and then Jay will chime in. The two of them will tag team to explain how we think this is going to be augmented with the historic district guidelines. So I'll turn the floor over to Stephanie.
Thank you, Alan, and thanks for having me here today.
Thanks for being here.
I have the pleasure of knowing most of you, so I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. I have a couple of handouts for you. The first is a template for the Design Review Board staff report, and this one-pager is the template for our record of decision. A couple of years ago, you may remember, the community had extensive discussion with the council regarding the Design Review Board process. And so starting with those discussions, the planning staff embarked upon essentially what amounts to a transformation of how design review is performed in the city. And so I was very happy to join the city and embark on a role to help facilitate the transformation of that process, as well as provide a service to our applicants to assist them in understanding better what the Design Review Board was looking for and how to present their projects. And so any application that goes before the Design Review Board is assigned to a planner, and then I will meet with the applicant and the planner, or sometimes Jay will also, he's engaged in that design review process as well. He will meet with the applicant as well, and we will facilitate the process insofar as I attend all of the Design Review Board meetings and am able to help all of our applicants understand what the Design Review Board is looking for. And so what we've done with what we hope is a brief but thorough staff report and analysis, and we use this type of analysis when we're in our meetings with the applicants so they know what to expect and that they understand under what criteria their projects will be reviewed. So we break down the design review process as best we can, understanding that design is a continuum from the larger scale or macro scale to the micro scale. We break that down into essentially three sections or areas for discussion: site planning, and then mass and scale, and then design and detailing are those three subcategories, if you will. And for each, we ask the applicant to review their project, or to look at their project and how it fits in with the neighborhood. So particularly for site planning, that kind of analysis that we do with the Design Review Board projects outside of historic districts will actually be quite similar to that done within historic districts. How does the development pattern, what does that suggest for a site in the neighborhood, and how does the new proposal respond to that development pattern? And very often this has to do with vehicular access to the site. Where is the parking arrangement? And what is the landscaping like? Those are some of the issues that we analyze as part of that process. Then once we've looked at the overall site planning, we look at the mass and scale and how that relates to the rest of the neighborhood. And we try to remove issues of style from the analysis of a project, which is a challenging thing to do, understanding that there are certain formulations of mass and scale that apply to some styles and not to others, and we're very, very clear and cautious about that. Even in our Design Review Board meetings, you should know that we actually use the Historic District Design Guidelines, because that's a very good, it's a good model or kind of catalog for if you're going to do a Spanish Revival house, what characteristics should you include? If you're going to do a Mediterranean Revival house, does that kind of boxy appearance fit into the neighborhood? And if not, why not? So we do use those design guidelines with our applicants as a tool and refer to them quite a lot. So with the mass and scale particularly for the single-family residential areas, what we find is that when someone is redeveloping a site, they're typically wanting a larger building on the site than exists. And so how the mass and scale is designed is really instrumental in having that project fit in. And then design and detailing will follow that, and what the Design Review Board is looking for is a holistic design that is very well integrated, particularly that the mass and scale and the design and detailing dovetail very nicely, and that the design and detailing enhances the overall idea and design of the building. We also try to ensure that the design and detailing is of a level of quality that's commensurate with the buildings around it. And as we've been talking about, the mass and scale somewhat, but particularly the design and detailing will be very critical in your review of properties that are within historic districts. So I think maybe, Jay, if you want to discuss how the historic district aspect will differ or be the same.
You know, we're kind of lucky because when we do the context reports for the historic districts, we have a discussion of the styles that are found in the district and what the character defining features are, and then the district guidelines also break things down by style and building component, talk about guidelines for, you know, how things should be done. What's important, I think, for the Commission to remember is that you'll be looking at two different kinds of things as the Design Review Authority. You'll be looking at new construction, which in our historic districts we hope is a relatively rare thing for total ground up because we don't have a lot of vacant lots in them, so it means we may be losing something. We may lose non-contributors, which can get a demolition permit easily, and then we want the new construction to be sympathetic into the context of the district, obviously. And then you'll also be looking at proposals for, you know, significant alterations, you know, fairly large additions, or any other work that we can't approve at staff level. So the thing to remember is the staff level review is basically anything that kind of meet the guidelines, the historic district guidelines, can be approved at staff level. So you will not be seeing many window replacement applications unless someone says, I want to put in windows that you can't approve, so then we're going to take it to the Commission. The Commission has authority to go beyond the guidelines. So you're not bound by the guidelines, but we're using them as the guiding tool for everything that we talk about. So issues like mass and scale will be referring to the district report specifically so that we can really look at the context of the neighborhood. And most of our historic neighborhoods so far are fairly homogeneous in mass and scale. But what's interesting is a neighborhood like Rossmoyne, where we have kind of distinct sections of the potential district. So we have very large lots with very large houses, and we have relatively small lots with smaller houses. And so your analysis is going to have to take into account that kind of differential. And when we work with the consultants who are putting these together, especially now that we've really started thinking more about how design review is going to be working, we're going to make sure that their reports kind of address a lot of these issues so that we can give you factual kind of data about lot sizes and parcel and building sizes, as well as the more experiential kind of stylistic differences between houses and how that affects their massing and their scale.
And so as our team has talked about starting to bring some of these projects to you, we think it's important for you and also our applicants to have a level of consistency, especially since this is very similar to the design reviews. So I just wanted to give you a copy of the template that we use for our design review process. This is the Design Review Board template. It will be modified in its language, obviously, before it comes before you. I do want to highlight on page 1 environmental constraints. When that goes to DRB, we always include a historic assessment of the property. I thought you might appreciate that point. Then on page 2, design guideline review and staff analysis, that's where the historic guidelines and context will be referenced. And then we will have to think very carefully about what parts of the neighborhood to compare to. This neighborhood comparison survey is typically, as it's done for the Design Review Board, is typically very important to the community so that they see what are the facts of the proposal and how do they compare to the facts of the buildings around them. And so we'll likely keep this in for a level of consistency and compare the building to just what's immediately around it, so that a building, say, that you're reviewing, if the Ross Moyne district is approved, for example, that's 500 houses, you'd really want to focus your review on how the building fits into its immediate surroundings and not necessarily allow the applicant to pick and choose similar properties that may be on the outskirts of the district far away from the proposal. And just so that you understand, all of the notes in blue are notes to the planners and notes really to ourselves, so that we have a clear understanding of what gets included in each section. We wanted to offer those to you so that you would have an understanding of what the criteria is, what kind of questions we're asking to our applicants, and what are the items included. So you can see what's included in site planning. At the bottom of the page, at page 2, and at the bottom of each section, you'll see provide a summary statement. Now, what we try and do is we go through the details in each section. Then for each section, we provide a summary statement saying briefly how that project is or is not compatible with the neighborhood. And then those summaries will then get lifted. They will be tinkered with as the board sees fit, and they will be included in the record of decision, so that the board will go on record to say what is important about this proposal that makes it fit into its environment. And so you can see some of the detail that we include in the report. And then if you shift your attention for a moment to the record of decision, what we do for Design Review Board is record the motion, the second, and the votes. Then something that we work very hard on is to describe whatever conditions and considerations have come out of what can be a long and wide-ranging discussion that the Design Review Board members have. If you've ever watched a Design Review Board meeting or been involved in one, you'll see at the end of discussion of the item, the planner and sometimes myself will repeat back what we've heard. And we want to make sure that those points are clear, that they're clear to the applicant, that they're clear to the public, that we have a record of what the decision is. And then we will take that language, sometimes we'll improve the grammar a little bit, and we'll include that in this record of decision. So that allows us to have a guide, because often, even if a project is approved, often, almost, I would say 99% of the time, there are comments for inclusion as the project continues in its process. So our staff will work very closely with the applicant to make sure that those conditions are adhered to before it goes in for plan check. And then once the permit set is submitted for plan check, our planners will double check to make sure that's included, all those items are included. And since that becomes then part of the design, when we do our final walkthrough, all of those conditions and considerations are included in the follow-through that we normally do for every project.
If I may interject on this point, this is actually a very important point for the council and for the community when they overhauled or modified the design review process about 2 years ago, as Stephanie introduced the topic. There was a very strong interest in the council and the community in having essentially kind of findings or minutes documenting the design review board's deliberation. Prior to us adopting this sort of procedure or policy of incorporating this record of decision as part of the board's deliberations and vote, it was oftentimes very difficult to know why the board approved a project or denied a project. There was no kind of written analysis. And so to a large extent, this entire discussion, the broader staff report, but then ultimately the record of decision, is a way of documenting the board's decision-making process and their analysis and their reasoning, essentially, for approving the project as it was designed. So it's a very important point that we maintain consistency with that as the commission.
And we've been very pleased with that transformation. I think our applicants have been pleased because they have found that they have more predictability, and even though it takes a little bit more time to submit an application, they have more of a sense that they'll move through relatively quickly. They'll go typically, probably I would say, a substantial percentage, somewhere around 80% or maybe more of our projects are approved with conditions on the first try. And that's to the credit of the planning staff that works closely with all of the applicants. And I also want to highlight how closely Jay has been already working with our applicants, particularly in projects that are nearby historic structures or projects that are of any revival style. We call on Jay consistently, daily, for his expertise, and he will thankfully continue to work with our DRB applicants as well as the applications that come before you as part of a district.
Any questions? Stephanie?
Well, I have a comment. I'm really thanking my lucky stars that you are here, and I wish you would have been here in the 80s and the early 90s before the design review process was implemented, because, we're obviously living with some of the abominations that were built during that period. But I did have a couple questions, and I think this is really great and really helpful, and I can't wait till it's issued. And the idea of having a record of decision is really a great idea, because obviously not only can you be systematic, but consistency, what the criteria can't change, and that's been the problem all along, or was the problem all along. So it's really wonderful. Congratulations on putting something this thorough together. I'm interested to know specifically, with Jay's involvement, like what is the criteria? I think it's great that you're involved, but that's interesting because, when would something be? I'd like to understand that a little bit more, just discussion-wise, because that it has oftentimes been when a property isn't protected, or if it's if it's a very historic-looking property that's in a neighborhood that doesn't have any apparent context. I wonder if there's any discussion. So could you just elaborate a little more on that?
If I could just clarify, your question, Ms. Fedor, is regarding Jay's involvement in properties that are not in historic districts?
Stephanie mentioned, Jay mentioned revival styles, and, I don't know whether that just meant anything that looks like it might be historical, or
Period-oriented, I think.
just period-oriented buildings.
Yeah, we call on Jay frequently, probably. I'm not sure if it's more. He loves it. He's always available.
Watch with sure.
Because frankly, a lot of the new projects that come before the Design Review Board are done in historic revival styles. And the board has stated over and over again that it's very important to them that there's a level of authenticity.
Oh, okay, so you're not
is for
talking about
non-designated.
necessarily residences from the revival period that are being modified, but people who are doing neo-revival style buildings.
There's actually both. There's
Okay.
actually both, because we do have additions and renovations
Right.
of existing homes that have these wonderful qualities, and sometimes we have to talk with the applicants, and Jay is very good at expressing why these particular features that they may or may not want to include in their new proposal really do add value to a property. So that's one of the roles that Jay
Right.
will play.
Because I think that's where the biggest problems could be in the neo-revival, I guess.
That's a part of it, and then another part of it is for the new projects that sometimes will be essentially very contemporary projects with the kind of revival style window dressing. And those are not the kinds of projects that the DRB typically likes to see. They like to see a level of authenticity, even if there are some contemporary features or there's some modification, because in all honesty, most developers are not going to build 12-inch thick walls with the kind of plaster and steel windows and all of that that you might have seen in the 20s. But we really help guide the applicant to a level of authenticity, making sure there are recessed windows, particularly when it's in the public view, divided lights and what proportion works for those divided lights, where appropriate, all of the characteristics that are appropriate to a particular style, and also to avoid a mixing of styles, because often we'll have a predominantly Spanish Revival style house with a craftsman type entry. So very often we'll call in Jay for his level of expertise, because he's extraordinary at making very specific recommendations to an applicant when, myself and the planner will, in all honesty, throw up my hands and say, I really don't know how to advise you on this. Jay!
Great.
Yeah, but this commission has a real head start because we have the design guidelines, and we're bound to use those in the historic districts for the parts of the buildings that are visible from the street. And that's another thing we have to remember. We're only focusing, using the guidelines on those visible aspects of the property. So, and this will all be reminded at the hearings and in the
Even though it's a new
documentation.
building, let's say you're infill a new project, you're just going to look at we put more emphasis on the front, is that what you're telling me?
Well, no, we're going to look at that 360 for new construction, but in terms of, window treatments and things like that, we might allow a differential if the applicant really wanted that.
So if we have a wood window, casement windows, are we going to let people do sliders on the side?
On the side of an existing house?
Yeah.
Not on an existing house. The guidelines they give priority to front facades, a secondary priority to side facades, which allows some lenience as long as you're matching what's there. And so you can't say that a slider is going to match a double hung, so that probably wouldn't
Yeah, well,
work.
that's what I'm getting. I'm very familiar with the design guidelines. We're very specific, and what we're telling people, okay, character-defining feature of a Spanish Revival
Yeah.
is casement.
The design guidelines specifically say that vinyl windows could be permitted at visible side facades if they meet all of the other design characteristics of the existing historic windows. So I think, in a way, that's so unlikely that we'll ever have that happen that it
Okay.
kind of makes them illegal, but not
You have a
quite.
question, Commissioner Shire? I had a couple of questions. You mentioned about not getting involved in the style. Now, although part of the application requirements, correct me if I'm wrong, on a design review, it asks for style statement from the applicant, what kind of style is it? Do you concur with them? Because that comes in later.
Yeah, what I'd like to clarify is that we try to, in our design analysis, really stay a little bit clear of style. When an applicant has come to us and said they want to do a house that's this or that particular style, we try to guide them to be consistent with that style. But the style statement piece, we're actually we may drop from
Yeah, I noticed the
the
strike out there.
application requirements, and to be honest, what we found in working with the Design Review Board is that they appear to be prioritizing mass and scale as how to really modulate the mass and scale in a way that makes a building fit, and then they move from the mass and scale and say, okay, how will the design and detailing, particularly the materials, because they've often encouraged more than one material to be used on a property or on a design, if it's not, say, a true Spanish colonial revival style where they'll ask for steel trowels stucco. But they'd have the materials then reinforce the design that shows up with the mass and scale, have the window proportions, reinforce those pieces. What we realized when we started transforming the process is that the term style that was really throughout the guidelines and the application process really means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And so in doing this, what we think is a thorough analysis is to break down what is the meaning of style and what are really the important components that the design review board is looking for when they're looking for a right fit into a neighborhood.
And for
I'll just interject on that one too. Because, you know, Commissioner Mardian, that sometimes you could say the style is modern or contemporary, and that could mean just about anything
right.
from the
That's what I'm getting
1920s to today. I mean, modernism is to a certain extent a historic style, depending on how it's employed, or it could be crappy stuff from the 1980s that Ms.
right.
Fedor is sort of referencing. That being said, I think in the historic districts, when we do design review, there will be many properties where it's actually going to be relevant to discuss style, because the historic district report, the context report survey, will oftentimes identify specific styles, particularly for period revival homes, and then our design guidelines in historic districts are based on style and the particular detailing of style. So I think with historic districts, I think we'll probably see a greater emphasis on architectural style appropriately applied than we do in the regular design review process, where it's a little more open-ended on that question.
And we also have a provision in the district ordinance that if there's a property that doesn't fit any of the 13 established styles that we've identified, the applicants would have to come to us with a definition and description of the new style, and then we'll be adding that to the list so that we make sure that the district report encompasses all of the styles that are in that area.
The reason I asked that question, because, you know, we discussed it when we were adopting the design guidelines a few years ago, and we've discussed also, okay, do we really want to mimic what's out there?
Yeah, and the ordinance is open to contemporary infill. So you can choose from the menu of the existing styles in a district if you wanted to do a historicist design, or you could design in a contemporary style that meets the massing scale and all of the other criteria so that we
Would
have.
staff have a role? Let's say you come up with a contemporary modern design. Would staff, because now I know that staff recommends approval or denial during the process or during the first stage of design. Would you tell the applicant, no, the style doesn't fit there?
No, we basically, when someone comes to us with a style, if we think that style is appropriate, and since the ordinance is written so that you can choose a French revival if there are other French revivals in the area, and then we would work through the kind of design review to make sure that the new design is going to work in the context of that style and the neighborhood. But if someone wanted a contemporary building, you know, we'd do it the same thing.
The reason I'm leading to that question, because everybody wants hybrid style of these areas that we're talking about these days. I mean, you know, that's the nature of the beast these days. I mean, are we going to tell people, no, you can't have a Mediterranean? Now, although I understand Ms. Reich's point of view, that, you know, are we going to say, you know, you really shouldn't pursue it, or, you know, or...
Well, that, of course, will be up to the commission. There have been cases in Design Review Board review where we've suggested to an applicant that, for example, a Mediterranean revival style, because of its massing, it's a very significant sort of boxy form, may not fit into a neighborhood. And so we've, in the past, suggested that if you do want a historic revival style, in this particular neighborhood, a Spanish colonial revival style will fit better.
So you do give them that direction?
We do, based on the massing.
Okay.
We are very clear with our applicants that as much as possible, particularly for DRB, obviously it'll be different for the historic districts, but for DRB, we do our very best to be style neutral, and we really focus on the massing that fits into the neighborhood.
Okay.
And that seems to make a lot of sense because the whole theme of California architecture is eclecticism, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And so,
It worked really well in the 20s.
Yeah.
Yes, it did. Well, we do have a
in a
lot
certain
of,
context, it worked. And how do you, fast forward that into today's world? And that's not such an easy thing to do. So I think sticking to like basic architectural principles is a better way to do it than to say, oh, that,
And by the time
not right.
an application comes to the commission, it should have gone through hopefully several kind of iterations with staff, and we really work with the applicants over time to get it to the point where we're ready to bring it to the commission.
I'd like to, if possible, propose that at some point in the future, not saying when, there be a discussion with illustrations or pictures about infill and successful infill versus unsuccessful infill, because it is very hard to picture what a contemporary or newly built house would look like successfully in a historic neighborhood. But there are a couple examples out there. In fact, there's one I want to take a picture of that works beautifully in Glendale, and there are probably others, and we should start to train our eyes to those. So, sometime,
Right.
not now.
Question, Stephanie, you mentioned earlier that you work with staff and you have, like, you said 80%. So if staff recommends approval and the chances are, will go through, is that what?
Well, that may be overstating the case of it.
Okay.
What we try to do is get an applicant to a point where the design review board will approve it. What we found is that consistently we will have some outstanding conditions, all of which we've talked with the applicant prior to the report going out to the public. And what we found also consistently is that the board will usually approve the project but add additional conditions. There are times when we think that the board can go ahead and approve the project and apply conditions that staff can review and work with the applicant on. There are those times, maybe that's the 20% I was referring to, where the board will want to see that project again, even though the staff has recommended it for approval. And we typically, because most of our applicants are happy to work with us in order to have a positive recommendation go to the board, we very rarely will be recommending a return for redesign.
Okay, that's good too.
If I may on this one too, again, mirroring the design review process, when you see design review applications in historic districts, as the commission, staff will be making a recommendation to approve, deny, return for redesign, or approve with conditions. So the part of a very important point with the council and the community that staff voice their opinion on these particular on those projects and give recommendations to the commission. So you'll be seeing a very, very similar set of recommendations that the design review board sees.
Okay.
So to clarify then, the recommendation would come in the form of this report
That's
with the
correct.
recommendation, and we get these prior to our...
It'll be just like the staff reports
Okay.
that you get now, just
Okay.
reformatted. You'll also be getting, if we have projects on Glendale Register properties, it's going to be a slightly different process because we don't have the district design guidelines for those. You've already had a few where you're looking at the Alex Forecourt and the Masonic Temple. And what we try to do in that, and I'm not sure how the format of that type of report is going to shake out, but we're going to try to make everything as consistent as possible. But those reports will also invoke the Secretary of the Interior standards as kind of the guidelines that we use for the Glendale Register properties. So staff will always make sure that we're highlighting the areas where we feel it meets the guidelines or where it might not meet them, so that you can make your assessment based on that.
Last question. Now we don't have noticing and posting of a sign when we designate anything on historical
Not for
property.
designation.
Not for designation, but for design review board purposes, we will be having that.
Yeah,
That's
well,
what-
it'll be the same
Same as
process.
a- okay.
Mhm.
All right. Any more questions? Thank you very much, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very helpful.
Okay. Any other items, or that's about it, I
I think
think?
we've run the
We're on,
course.
we're good. All right. I guess I need a motion for adjournment.
Okay, I move we adjourn the meeting.
I second.
Thank you.